Yeah, so hi everyone. My name's Matt. I'll do a full introduction in a second. I know we've got an hour today, so we've got plenty of time to go through all of the material and all the stuff that I have planned. So just sit tight for a second. We've still got plenty of people coming in. There will be a bit of housekeeping, but just as a quick kind of overview of what we're going to go through. Obviously, we're going to talk about these topics. So the modern data stack and how you can improve your product analytics expertise through utilizing the modern data stack. We're going to talk a bit about that. We're going to talk about some kind of actually some practical things that you can potentially do right now, depending on whatever stage that you are in. And then we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So I know, and I'll apologize in advance, I know that I can talk incredibly quickly, but that's just because I've got a lot that I want to get through today. So please do put any questions in the Q&A section in Zoom. It should be available to you. If you can't see it, if it's not there, then just put them in chat and Larissa will be able to put those questions in at the end. I will do my absolute best to answer everything when we get to the end, and if there isn't anything we can get to or something that is slightly unrelated to what we're talking about today, we'll make a note of that. We'll make a note of who asked the question as well, and we'll get back to you in due course about that. The final thing, and I will prompt you at the end as well, is a QR code is going to come up at the end. So scan that, please, if you can. And also for anyone watching the recording of this as well, there's a QR code that will come up at the end, and you can scan that, and then it's just a quick survey at the end. So please do take the time to fill that out. But as I said, we will just wait a few more, we'll wait a little bit longer for everybody to join who's going to join, and when we're kind of at that level, we will get going. But yeah. Okay, so we've gone over by a couple of minutes, and obviously this is recording, so it's absolutely fine. So we're going to get going through what we want to cover today. So quick introduction. So my name is Matt. I am a strategic customer success manager here at Mixpanel. So my role is to work with kind of our enterprise accounts across Europe and in the Middle East, not only talking about what Mixpanel is and how to use it. And for those you who don't know, we are a product and user analytics tool, so to understand your user behavior, how they're using your product better. But also I work with customers on their analytics strategy, so how they can think about their data, think about the data that they're collecting, and put that to use. That may seem like a very simple term, but you'd be surprised at the number of organizations who need some help in that regard. It's a rapidly changing and expanding market where people need upskilling. There are new tools all over the place, and what we help is to kind of say, look, you have loads of tools, you have loads of sources of data. How can you interpret those, use those in the best way possible? So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to be that, but just to make sure that there are a bit of background on that. But I've been at Mixpanel for nearly 4 years now. As I said, work with a huge number of customers across Europe. And yeah, that's kind of what I do now. So as I said, just a bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A function in Zoom. If that for some reason doesn't work or you can't find it, put them in chat. We'll pick them up and put them in there, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. I have a timer running to keep me to time, so I will make sure that I kind of get through everything, and we have plenty of time for that. This is all being recorded, so don't worry about missing anything. Don't worry if there's something that comes up that you want more information about. There is a page at the end which I will point you towards, which for those who are going to receive this information and receive a link through all of that, you'll be able to get through to all of those pages. So there's a lot of things that I talk about today in terms of you can go here and fill out a survey, and maybe there's a documentation here. There will be links to all of that, so don't worry. And if you have any technical problems, just kind of check throughout. Obviously, as I said, if you're going to be getting a recording of this, then it is something that hopefully shouldn't be too much of an issue going forward. All right, so the agenda of what we're going to talk through. We're going to talk about the traits that define each stage of the product analytics maturity. So a lot of you will find that you're in different stages. A lot of you may never have thought about it before. That's absolutely fine. That's kind of what we're here for. But we're going to talk through that. We're going to also go through a user-friendly overview of the modern data stack. So what tools kind of do what and where they fit. And then we're going to talk about what to consider when you progress through the various stages of analytics maturity. So what you can kind of do throughout those stages, how you could look to improve all of those. It does boil down to a couple of key things, but we'll touch on them as we go through. And hopefully, as I said, also, attached to this, there will be practical things that you'll be able to do right now. So things that you can take away and things that you can kind of sit down and start thinking about through all of this as well. But that's what we're going to go through. So the first thing, as I said, product analytics maturity. So there are different levels in here. There is actually a stage 0, which we'll touch on in a minute, but then it goes novice, intermediate, advanced, and expert. Now, you may kind of know where you are already. You may not. There are some brief descriptions here of what each stage means, but we can go into these in more detail. But it's just suffice to say that there are different stages. We know this because of the number of companies we speak to, the number of people we work with, and kind of understanding how all of these work. And stage 0, as I said, is kind of non-existent. Now, one thing we're going to focus on here through all of these stages, and also the 4 areas that we're going to look to improve and how we can do that, are the pillars of product analytics. So there are 4. So data collection, depth of analysis, collaboration, and product metrics. Now, these define kind of each stage throughout the maturity model. And the first stage, being non-existent, is kind of you're not collecting any data. Now, there may be some people today who are at this stage, and that's absolutely fine, because everyone has to start somewhere. So everybody at some stage will have been at this stage, would have been at this point. That's not a problem. But really what it means is you're not collecting any data. So because you're not collecting any data, you kind of can't do anything with it. If you're here, really good thing to start off, and this is kind of the first thing that underpins a lot of what I'm going to say, and I apologize in advance for the number of times I repeat it, is think of the questions that you want to get answers to, and then go from there. And what I mean by that is, even if you are at stage 1, which is novice, as we go on to the other stages, you need to think about what's important to you. So what questions do you need to answer, which then informs what data we need to collect? So here at the novice stage, we're collecting high-level data, so maybe page views. Now, this is maybe what you would think of like old school analytics or kind of like legacy product analytics. So we can see how many people landed on our page. We may not really know what they were doing after that, but actually we can see how many people are landing on our page, how many people are downloading, information like that we can get. If you're working with an app, obviously it'd be downloading. Depth of analysis as well. We can look at things like unique visitors. We can look at app opens, but actually we're not getting much more than that. So for collaboration, there's not much to collaborate on. And the same with product metrics. We're looking at like what we would call vanity metrics, which we'll touch on in a minute. So don't worry about this term coming right now. And then we get into intermediate. So this is where we're now collecting more things. So we're going beyond what we would say a relatively basic collection. We're connecting some tools together. We are getting some more maybe basic insights, or even more than that. So we're looking at funnels, we're looking at retention, we're looking at conversions through maybe registration or purchase, or when somebody came from X, did they do Y, things like that. Collaboration now becomes more people are more involved. Now, depending on your organization and depending on the size of your organization, this collaboration stage is something that I would say is one of the things that I work on that has most challenges. Because if you're in a relatively small organization, then actually collaboration can be really easy because everybody's using it. But you may not know what you don't know. So what we want to try and do is get as many people involved as possible, and essentially put data and the collection of data and product analytics at the center of all product decisions, and kind of at the center of the company. And that's like a big term, so don't be worried about that right now. And then into product metrics, the last one, we're looking at conversion. We're looking at more complicated things. Stage 3 is advanced. Even more things are being collected. We're connecting even more tools together. We're getting deep understanding of our data. Even more teams are involved. The engineering team are looking at data there. The design team want to know what's going on. We're testing, we're doing all of these things as well. We're also looking at retention. We're creating cohorts or segments of our users, and we're starting to kind of weave our data sources together. So it's coming in from one, it's being analyzed in the middle, it's going out elsewhere as well. Here, the data is kind of, as it says at the bottom, is the compass for most of your decisions. It's driving your product development because you want to know what's working and why. So again, here, it's like testing. It's more things that we can do. It's like, if we make this change, what impact will it have on our users? Will it be good? Will it be bad? And actually, can we then act on it? We'll come back to this later when we talk about product metrics, but a really big question to ask yourself is like, if we're making all of these changes or releasing this feature for our product, is it going to have an impact on our users? Can we measure that? And then actually, do we have a plan if something goes up or down based on that? So that's an important thing. The final stage here is expert. So this is where data is collected through complicated systems. You know, we're connecting data warehouses. We may have a CDP, we have an attribution tool, we have a messaging tool, we have loads of things connected together. The depth of analysis is now incredibly important. We maybe even have different teams. So we now, for collaboration, have data science teams and analyst teams looking at deep understanding of our data. But actually, that doesn't leave the product and the design and the engineering teams and CRM and sales teams or whatever without it, because they can still do their own analysis. The science teams and the analyst teams are now freed up to do the kind of more complex information and complex analysis as well. And the leadership team really understand what's going on with all of this. Now, this is where obviously we want everybody to be. I would say there's a lot of information here. This is the first point where I'm going to say, if you're going to kind of Google Mixpanel product analytics maturity, it'll actually take you to a quiz where you can find out kind of what level you're at. But it's also a good point to say we're going to try and do a really quick poll using chat instead of like any sort of poll feature. But we'd love to kind of know in the chat what level you think you are now. So either 1 for non-existent, 2 for novice, 3 for intermediate, 4 for advanced, or 5 for expert. And I'll pause for a second and see where everyone is. I just saw, Brian, there was a question there. It's like, yes, we will be sending these afterwards, so don't worry about that. So lots of things coming in. Yeah, most people intermediate, 2 to 3. Yeah, lots of 3s. That's all good. Yeah, 3s to 4s in there as well. Male 1, not a problem at all, being non-existent, or if you're thinking at the old scale for novice. I couldn't think of a way to get a bullet point starting with a 0, but that's fine. So lots of 3s, lots of 2s, and some 2.5s, which is okay, sort of in the middle there, that's fine. But just to take that from what we've seen in the people that we work with, the vast majority of people kind of fit what you guys have said here. So most people fit as intermediate. Some people are still non-existent, as I said, that's absolutely fine. And then most people bucket into intermediate. The second is then advanced, and very, very few people get to expert. Now we'll touch on why in a second, but the reason is that it's incredibly hard for all of those pillars to be at that expert level, and kind of what defines that as well. But we can kind of come to that. But things to consider when you're thinking about this is, what's the end game? What do you want to get out of it? Again, it's, you know, going back to what I've said before, it's what do you want to know throughout all of this? Now, obviously, the end game for the product is to be as successful as possible. But in terms of collecting data and product analytics maturity, what do you need to know? So what's the questions that you want answers to, and that will underpin or overhang, or whichever way you want to think about it, where you need to go with what you want to collect. Also think about who's going to be using the tools. You could go out right now, if you're non-existent or you're at the novice level or intermediate, you know, if we said to you, you're at intermediate, and to get to advanced, you want to have more sources of data, you could go out and buy loads of tools. But if there's nobody to use them, if there's nobody to connect them together, it's kind of irrelevant, because it doesn't really matter how much data you're collecting. If the data's not accurate and nobody's there to use it, then kind of who cares, you know? The third point is, put significant thought into what stage you're in right now. So what do you do well, and what could you improve on? Where do you want to go? Kind of feeds into point 1, and who's going to be involved in that as well. So these all kind of merge together. So we need to think about what teams could benefit from this, what people could benefit from this, how could we improve what we're doing if we improve these things. Now, remember, this doesn't have to be a linear progression. We can go non-linear progression through these stages, because one of the things that we could do is, right, you know, we have loads of people who want to understand things. We have lots of, you know, we know what metrics we want to track, but we have no data collection. So think about where you can improve all of these stages. because you may think to yourself, we may be at novice now or even non-existent, but if we fill in some of these areas that we're not so good at, maybe one or two or whatever, then you can move directly through more of these levels to a higher level. So you don't have to say, okay, now we are at novice. In order to move to intermediate, here's what we need to do. Now we're here. How do we get to advanced? How do we get to expert? You don't have to do that. It really comes down to what we can improve today, and also fundamentally, like, what are we doing not badly, but what are we not doing so well based on versus what are we doing so well. What I will say for all of these is each of them has not a way of doing it well and a way of doing it not so well, but it has its own inherent challenges that need to be overcome. And you'll find that at every stage. And that's really why we get so many people in the intermediate band and then into advanced, because in order to get to that expert level, one or more of these are incredibly hard to be like an expert at. We'll touch on it in a minute when we get to them, but I would say that I could count on one hand the organizations and companies that I worked with where their collaboration and their data culture would put them at the expert level. And that may mean that they are an expert at that, but their data collection, they're not collecting every source that they could. So even for them, when they are brilliant at doing one thing, it kind of pulls them down, if that makes sense. And then again, for other organizations, they're collecting every single source of data. They have tools all over the place collecting their data. So for data collection, they would be an expert. But maybe they have so many sources of data that actually for their product metrics, it's incredibly hard to organize. Think of like larger organizations. You have data coming from everywhere, talking to everything. But do people know where to get answers to questions? Do people know where to go? So it's incredibly hard to get to that top level. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't strive for that, but don't be disheartened if you look at it and think, oh, I'm only intermediate. I thought we were maybe doing better than that. It's just how it goes, so don't worry about that. First section of these pillars that we want to improve is data collection. I've touched on it already, but we want more sources of data because we want to answer more questions. So it comes down to, maybe we have an analytics tool. So we're tracking people who are downloading our app from the App Store. But do we know where these people came from before they downloaded the app? Now, the Android store and the what's it called? The iTunes store? Is it still called that? No, the App Store, whatever it might be. The App Store aren't very good at sharing that data, but there are some really good tools like AppsFlyer or Adjust and others, if you're using them, that can give you all of that information as well. Maybe you want to leverage a CDP, which is becoming even more popular across all of our customers. If you don't know what a CDP is, a customer data platform, it essentially takes all of your sources of data and sends it through a really nice system that then pipes it out in easy to use and easy to digest data at the end, which then pumps into tools like Mixpanel for analysis as well. The important thing with this as well is to maintain a robust tracking plan. This really does feed into what we're going to talk about in a minute for like the answers you can get to questions and how people can use the data. But if I, as a new user to your new employee of your organization, I come in, you've got loads of sources of data. You've got a CDP, you've got a messaging tool, you've got a BI tool, you've got product analytics, you've got everything connected together. But I don't know what any of the data means. What am I going to do? Am I going to get frustrated? Am I going to kind of try and work it out for myself? What if I can't work it out for myself? Or maybe even worse, I try and work it out for myself. I find insights that I think are relevant and valuable, but then actually they're not, because the data that I'm collecting or looking at isn't what it should be. So we need to understand what data we have and also how to maintain that. Now, this doesn't have to live inside one of the tools. So obviously, for those of you who use Mixpanel, we have a tool called Lexicon, which enables you to do this. But what we find as well is a really good thing is for multiple sources of data, you can have this stored elsewhere. So maybe in Confluence, maybe in Notion, maybe somewhere else. But essentially, somebody should be able to look at the tool that you're using, maybe the single tool or the multiple tools that you're using, and think, well, what does this thing mean? And go to one place and be able to look that up. It's something that I would say is a challenge, because it's fundamentally like at least a part-time, probably maybe even a full-time job to maintain that. Because if you're launching new features, onto the third point, there is tracking attached to that, which means you have to update documentation, you have to update plans, you have to make sure that everyone knows what that is. Again, I work with customers who have been with Mixpanel for a long, long time, and now their implementation, needs a little bit of work because they've grown as a company, great, but they've added new features on. So now, is there a duplication of events? Potentially, but are we firing multiple events at the same point when actually they mean the same thing? Yeah, maybe at some points, but it was useful for them when they were doing it, so we need to understand that as well. Maybe you want to combine front end and back end data. This is really useful as well. There will always be some data through front end tracking and SDKs that simply can't be collected, but through back-end server data, if you have it, you can combine that as well. And again, it can be combined anywhere. Maybe it's combined in a single data warehouse that pumps into a BI tool. Maybe it goes into a BI tool and a product analytics tool. That's fine as well. But it all needs to be integrated across your data stack. So this is where the modern data stack really comes into its own, because we're not just talking about a single tool, we're talking about multiple things. Now, here are some examples, and apologies in advance if tools that you are using don't appear on here. I'm sure you've all seen those diagrams that crop up on LinkedIn every few weeks, which are, here is the state of, data collection, and here's all of the tools for data collection, here's all of the data warehouse tools, here's all the BI tools, and there's so many of them, so they fit everywhere. This is just an example that we have. So think of it like this. You have data coming in from your products and from your users. Is it going through a CDP? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, doesn't have to. But then it goes into a product analytics tool. It may go through your data warehouse into a BI tool like Domo, Looker, Tableau, Power BI, whatever it might be. But then everything through that is being enriched with further data. So AppsFlyer and Branch and Adjust data, advertising and platform data, maybe through Facebook ads or everything through there. It's all feeding in through the CDP. You may have an A/B testing tool, so Optimizely, Taplytics, anything to do with that. You also may have a customer engagement or messaging tool or push notification tool. You may have built one internally. You may have a third-party one. But what we're talking about here is that through these tools, you should be able to collect any data that you need about your product, about your user, and if they're integrated correctly, they should all be feeding clean and accurate data through the tools, if it's bi-directional, or into the tools that then your internal end users, your PMs, your designers, your team who are using it, your analysts, are able to get insights that work for you. So this should be a continuously, kind of reviewed process. Are we using this in the right way? And it should be something that we are, if we need to, looking to add more things. Now, obviously, there may be systems that, kind of would say that they do more than just one thing, and that's absolutely fine. And I'm sure for lots of these tools, they all have maybe some sort of analysis thing come out of it. They have their own, maybe some of them also have a messaging thing as well. I think what we found in the years that we've been doing this is what you can do is you can really go after the best products that focus on one thing. As an example, Mixpanel did, and some of you, if you've been with us for long enough, probably know this, we used to do customer engagement or messaging. We also used to do A/B testing and experimentation. But what we found is that actually the tools who we partner with, like Airship and Iterable, OneSignal, Optimizely, things like that, they did them better than us. So why fight against a tool and a team of engineers who are solely working on this when we can double down on product analytics, which is what we do best, and partner with these tools as well? Other thing here is that everything that you see here does integrate with Mixpanel. If you have Mixpanel, you may have seen the integrations tab, so just take a look at that. But thing to take away from this is to remember, we want clean data from everything that we're collecting. We also want to have every tool at our disposal that we need to answer every question that we have about our user journey and what our users are doing with our product. That's where the data stack comes in. Just touch on that as well, is for the modern data stack, what tools do you need? So focus on the questions you need to answer. What KPIs do you need to track, which we'll come to in a minute? Who needs this data, which will inform your decisions on what tools you need. So answer those kind of three main things. The questions You need to answer about your product, which inform the KPIs, think about who needs the data, understand the tools that you need to inform that. So that's what we're talking about here. On to the second pillar, which is depth of analysis. Now, this is, let's think about, we've now got all of our data coming into whatever systems we're using, whatever product analytics tool, maybe it's a BI tool, maybe it's a combination, absolutely fine. The depth of analysis, it enables us to answer more complicated questions. Now, we already touched on this as we went through the stages, but kind of at the novice stage, we're thinking about like traffic. And then it's only when we get into intermediate, we're looking at things like acquisition. And then as we move further and further, we're looking at journey. So how do mobile and web compare? What's my user path? What does retention look like? What is the conversion through this funnel? Where do users go? And then when we get into deep engagement, not only is my product getting stickier, but it's really like looking at those trends, looking at those groups of users, and even going into that thing that we want to talk about, which is we've launched a feature. Did it have an impact on what my users are doing? Yes or no? Did it increase their engagement? Did it decrease their engagement? Did it result in a metric going up or going down? For depth of analysis, again, it really comes back to those things you want to know. Moving from intermediate to advanced on this one can be quite difficult, but it's more things like, with people that we've worked with, like Uber and Indeed, and for Mixpanel at the bottom as well, is that, simpler questions, they're still important to know because we still want to know them. But it's actually how we move beyond that is we want to get deeper insights out of our tool. So maybe, again, it's the average session time for like Indeed, but actually, when we move towards intermediate, we still want to know what the average session time was, but we actually need to know that what is making people apply for those first jobs. And when we get to advanced, it's that how many people have done at least one application 4 days out of the last 5 days. For Uber, it's 3 rides in the first 10 days. It's where we get into those key sort of metrics, which we'll come onto when we talk about analytics framework in a second, is that we want to know those kind of magic points where we can say, if we can get a user to reach this point, they will be a user for a long time. I'm sure a lot of you know that famous Facebook metric, and I never remember which way around it is, but it's something like if you added 10 friends in the first 7 days, they kind of had you as a customer, you were like more likely to be a lifetime customer. So that's a really kind of important thing to know. And that's the type of thing that you can only get when you have advanced analytics and you have enough tools to answer those questions through there as well. So really think about those tools that you need in order to get answers to those questions through that. The next one is collaboration. Now, this is the one that I said I probably work on most with customers. It's actually probably the one that I could talk about for longest. So I apologize if I go on slightly for this one. But this is a thing to think about when you're creating a data culture. So the first one, and we'll start in the top right and go clockwise, is a central data source. So we touched on this when we talked about data collection. So we need to have a central data source so that our end users, people internally who are using our analytics tools, know what everything means. So is that going to be stored in Confluence? Is it going to be stored in Notion? Is it going to be stored somewhere else, like a shared Google Doc, whatever it might be? Do we want to connect to data warehouse, data lake? And again, whatever tools it might be. This could go on and on and on with all those different sources. But fundamentally, someone should be able to come in and understand the data that you are collecting, what it means, how it relates to your product, and how they can get insights out of that. Because then going into step 2, everybody should be able to get self-serve insights. And this is what we do at Mixpanel, which is give you a tool where you can build your own charts, you can build your own reports, you can drill down into your data, and you can get self-serve insights out of this as well. So it doesn't have to be somebody that has a data science degree. It doesn't have to be somebody that lives in Excel and wants to do formulas, things like that. You should be able to say, what do I need to know about my end users? What do I need to know about my product? And I should be able to go and get that myself. So end users, maybe marketers, PMs, they can answer their own questions. And why is that important? Well, it's because actually that then frees up time for our analysts and data scientists to do our complex analysis. So it frees them up for maybe longer term things that you want to take a look at. So, things that you maybe want to, present to the board or have at longer term meetings. Your analysts should not be answering tickets, from people who could be getting the data for themselves. I'm sure we've all, worked for companies, and maybe people still do, where you have to log a ticket for an analyst to provide you with a CSV of data to then, go off and do your own thing. And then if that's wrong, you have to go back and log another ticket and whatever. If people who have those questions can go back to that second point, which is self-serve, and answer it themselves, then your analysts don't have to worry about that. It's all something that should be working in harmony together. Maybe your analysts still need to do, and your data scientists still need to help out, and they need to make sure that everything's being collected properly, but they should have most of their time spent, basically doing what you're paying them for, which is the complicated stuff. The next step is continuous learning. So this is where maybe you're adding in new tools or adding in new sources of data, but as the tool moves forward, your product moves forward, and the data you're collecting moves forward, everybody should be or given the time to upskill on new tools, new features, new things. It's not just, again, for the data scientists and the analysts, but it should be everybody. Everybody should have the confidence to get the answers they need and answer their own questions. And only with continuous learning can they do that. Now, I'm always someone who, when I get a new tool, when I get a new thing, I kind of get it to do what I want, and then I may stick with it. But actually, if you have time and you maybe have somebody to say to you, well, you could be doing this a lot better, here's some things that you can do to improve how you're using this, this is where this really fits in. So try and invest, maybe it's just time, maybe it's, with the team who, like the services team who you've bought the tool from, who can help you out with that. And the reason why that's so important is because it drives company-wide buy-in, because essentially you have as many people who is needed across your organization working on these tools and using this data. Now, I've seen this with customers I work with, where they're a relatively small organization, like 70, 75 people, but about 60 of them are using product analytics, and they're using it every day. It is important to them. Learning the product analytics tool is something that is included in their onboarding because it's incredibly important, and they are constantly given time and resources to learn and improve through that. Now, not everybody wants to be a data scientist, or in fact needs to be a data scientist, but, and I hate to go back to it, but everybody should get what they need out of the tool. If it's a relatively simple thing that they need an answer to, if it's a complicated thing they need an answer to, they should be able to do it. And because everybody is using data to answer all of their questions and to, in their everyday working life, it becomes something that's essential to the organization. So someone tries to do something, and someone tries to launch a new product, and somebody else says, well, hang on, why are we doing that? What's that going to improve? It's those sorts of things that then you have buy-in across the organization. It's important for everybody. And then maybe you think, okay, we've now got buy-in for these sources of data that we have, so maybe we need more sources of data. So now we start again. So we think, people are using this maybe at the base level, which means we have buy-in at the top because everyone knows, everyone's seeing the results of the self-serve analysis and the complex analysis that we're doing. So we have the buy-in from our VP team or whoever to go out and find those extra sources of data that we can then bring in through the data stack to improve this, and then we kind of all start over again. Thing to think about here is when creating a data culture, and I promise you this is not an easy task. This is something that, if you'd like, which I'm sure none of you do, we could talk about this for hours about how you can do this. But think about which area you do well. Do you have a single source of data? Are people able to self-serve? Can you answer those complex questions for complex insights? Are people given the opportunities to continuously learn, and do you have buy-in? If you can answer that, you then come back to where can you improve? Again, as I touched on already, it's the answers to the questions. So what questions do you have that you need answers? Where does it fit? And who needs the different tools? Everybody should be encouraged to get the answers they need. Everybody should be provided with the data that they need, and you should highlight positive use cases to encourage others. Now, this is something, not to touch on what we do too much, but something we do at Mixpanel incredibly well. Whereas everybody is given the opportunity and given the access to all the data that they need about how our customers are using Mixpanel. And then essentially you go off and you use it however you like. So that kind of feeds into the self-serve. There's a lot of people who do the complex stuff, and we are continuously trusted to improve on what we're doing, which results in a buy-in. So I would say that we do this quite well, but there are always ways to improve because we're constantly ingesting new data. So we have to maintain that clean data that we had at that first point as well. So that's a big thing there. As I said, not a simple one, definitely something to think about. Final one of the pillars is product metrics. Now, this is where choosing the right metrics can be incredibly hard because, again, something I work on a lot with customers is, what do you want to know and what metrics are the most important to you? We speak to customers all the time and say, what's the most important metric? And they say revenue. And we say, well, yeah, I mean, it kind of is, but what you probably want to look at instead is maybe a leading metric. So something like user engagement, because like revenue could be going up because you're shoving loads of people into the funnel, but actually, if nobody's engaged, is sticking around, as soon as that top of the funnel filling in with new users stops, you're in trouble. So revenue may be going up, but if it's going up at the expense of user engagement and retention, then it's not great. Also, try and avoid things like vanity metrics. Now, this can be quite hard because if you are a new product, then actually visitors, downloads, things like that are incredibly important. We need to get people into the product. We need to fill the top of our funnel. But instead, think about, visits with an action, downloads with an action. After somebody downloaded and started using our app or visited our website, did they do something that was valuable to me or not? Because if they landed, did nothing, and then disappeared, I don't know, is that valuable to me? I would say probably not. Also think about user metrics rather than business metrics. So not just, as we said, revenue, and not just things like overall usage or time spent, but the quality of the time spent. So if someone's on your page a lot, and this is actually one that we see, if someone's in your app a lot, but they can't do what they want to, which is why they're in there in your app a lot, are they going to stick around? Are they going to leave? Are they going to churn? We don't know. And that's what we want to take a look at as well. And try and avoid, where you can, metrics that can be manipulated. Now, we're not saying that you shouldn't track these, but they probably shouldn't be the most important thing that you're looking at. So things like NPS or CSAT. I actually used to work for a company that did user experience management, so like surveying customers. And you'd be staggered to know, like, if a customer is surveyed after they've bought something, then their NPS score and satisfaction score is going to be higher. Of course it is. So it's not something that we would say don't measure, but what we would say is, potentially don't put that as your most important thing. It should be something that's maybe secondary as well. We also recommend that you should use some sort of framework. Now, the framework that Mixpanel talks about and kind of develops is bottom right, which is the focus metric framework. Again, you can kind of search all of these and they'll come up. You may have a North Star metric framework. You may be using Google Heart, which is fine. You may be using Lean Analytics, but all of these KPIs that you're measuring should be tracked in a framework. And this is because you may think, well, what is the most important metric for me as an organization? And then you put that on a wall, or put that on a whiteboard, or on a screen in your office. But how am I, as a single sales rep, or how am I as a CSM, or how am I as an engineer supposed to influence that metric every day? That's hard to know. But by breaking it down further and further to like level 1s, level 2s, or different KPIs within that, I can think to myself, actually, I can focus on this thing that my product area or my team or me individually, I can work on, and then that feeds up into a higher metric, and that feeds up to the most important thing, the North Star metric, the focus metric, the key KPI, whatever it might be, and we can drive through that. Another reason why using a framework is so important is because it means that you can track all your metrics and you can kind of see which ones are working and which ones aren't. Now, a fundamental question or fundamental kind of statement to this is, if you are tracking something as a KPI or a metric and you have no plan if it goes up or if it goes down, then it's not really a KPI. Because like, if we would say to ourselves, I want to track this conversion through these stages in my products, and we say, oh, okay, well, the conversion's naught, and we're not going to do anything about it, then like, it's a poor use of our time. So think about that. Most of it, think about that. Other thing as well, and this is again feeds into the focus metric framework that we use at Mixpanel, is try and focus on customer lifecycle metrics. So think about what's your journey of your user. So we talk about things as reach, activation, engagement, and retention. But reach is like how many people could be using your product. Activation is how do we onboard them once they kind of come into our funnel. Engagement, what actions are they doing? And retention, do we keep them coming back? And then the focus metric sits above all of that, and it says, this is the thing that we want to be changing. This is the thing that we want to be driving. And these life cycle metrics feed into that because it's based on active usage. That's the most important thing. We then also have a business specific metric, potentially. This is where maybe like NPS and satisfaction can go in. It can be anything else. Like our business specific metric at Mixpanel is actually things like data center burn, so how much it costs us to host the data that we have, which is quite important. But it could be anything that kind of doesn't fit into like a life cycle metric. There are some really cool examples, like for a dating app that we work with, their business specific metric is called good churn. So it's actually users who find one another and then don't return to the app. So like retention goes down, but actually for them, that's a good thing because they did their job. Their product delivered so much value that people didn't need to use it anymore. Same with kind of like a fitness app. We have another one, which a customer who their business specific metric is somebody who reaches their goals and then doesn't come back. So for them, that's good. They did their job. So what next? We've got a few minutes before we're going into Q&A, but what next? So we've talked about those 4 areas. We've talked about what we can do within those. But what I would recommend is, taking that quiz, search Mixpanel product analytics maturity, kind of see where you are. Think about how you measure up right now. What do you do well? Data collection, depth of analysis, collaboration, metrics. Which ones do you do really well? Which ones do you think, actually, maybe we don't do this as well as we could, maybe we could do it better? What do you need to move forward? So what questions do you need to answer with data? What questions do you have about your product, your app, your website, whatever your product is, that you need to get answers to? Which tools can solve those problems? And also which teams can help you understand that as well? And think about planning, building, and then iterating. Everything that we've talked about should be something that's under constant review. All of the metrics that you're tracking should be under constant review. The tools that you're using, typically as a SaaS tool, there'll be a 1-2 year contract, so you can kind of review those as you go along. The way that you are storing your data as like a single source of truth, that kind of like data dictionary, is that the best way to do it? Do we need to iterate on that and make it better? The same with the collaboration as well. Is there something that we're doing well right now and some area that we need to kind of improve on how we're going to do that as well? It's constantly what you should be thinking about. Everything should be fluid. It should be being measured. It should be being updated. You should be collecting data on the ways that you are collecting data. That sounds very meta, but that's basically what you should be doing. You should be measuring how you are performing in each of these areas to understand what you could be doing better. And that's on that. So we've got some time for Q&A. There are a few questions in here. Let's see if I can load the Q&A. Cool. So the question in here was, what do you mean about products being sticky? Does that refer to how easy user flows through the product? No, it doesn't have to refer to how users flow through the product. It's actually going to be something that you think about users returning over time. So it's user retention would be kind of stickiness. So think about are my users coming back, but also think about the natural recurring frequency of your users. Now, it's one of those things that we all, we probably all want our products to be used every day, but that's just not the case. Think about like banking apps on your phone. You probably don't use them every day. You might, depending on what features they offer, but like I don't use mine every day. But that doesn't mean just because I don't come back every day that I've churned, that I've gone to another bank or whatever. It just means that I may use it every week, I may use it every month. So we need to think about the natural frequency of our product. So like how we could be measuring that. And then again, for stickiness, it's users coming back over time. Think about the apps that you probably all use on your phone, WhatsApp, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. They have incredible stickiness because users come back to them over and over again. That's kind of what we're trying to achieve here. So that's how I would measure stickiness on that one. It's like returning users over time. There's also another question for analysts and data scientists. Can you use on a freelance basis, or this is really a full-time role? I mean, I would say that's entirely up to you. It depends on the size of your organization. It also depends what you're trying to like achieve and the resources that you have. I appreciate that's a lot of like ifs, but it is true. If you're a small organization and a small team, but actually the tools that you have in your data stack enable you to do self-serve analysis for something that's like a one-off. Do you want to hire a data scientist? Yeah, you could do if you have resources for it, but actually you might think, we have a team of people, however small it may be, who are able to get the answers that we need out of the tools that we have, because we are confident in our data, we're confident in the tools that we've got. So maybe we don't need to do this. Obviously, there are plenty of people who do freelance stuff. In fact, quite a lot of the stuff we talked about today, there will be plenty of people who, offer freelance help in that. We have, again, not just a kind of technology partnership team, but like a solutions partnership team at Mixpanel. So companies, consultancies who can come in and do a lot of this stuff for you as well. So analyze your data stack and do some analysis work for you. I think as you grow as an organization, and what I've seen from companies I've worked with where they've kind of grown from a smaller team to a larger team and then into a very large team, is that what they tend to do is they maybe hire one analyst who works across all of the teams. And then as they grow, they may find they need 2 or 3 analysts to support everybody. And then it goes into maybe 1 analyst per team, and then through that as well. And depending on maybe that's product or that's marketing or that's, operations or whatever it might be. So that's what I've seen. As I said, it kind of depends, well, firstly on budget and whether you have the capacity to hire somebody for that, but also whether it's something that you feel like you need. I'll say as well on that data culture kind of wheel that I talked about, the complex insights don't have to be done by data scientists and analysts. They can be done by anybody. If you have the right tools and you have the right, confidence in your data, it should be something that anybody should feel confident in going in and answering those questions. So we should be able to know where our users are coming from. We should be able to know how quickly they are activated in our products and how quickly they become, valuable and how quickly they see value from our product. We should be able to know how engaged they are. We should be able to measure retention. If we can measure all of those things, they're actually relatively complex things, but you can do them with a couple of tools that you're collecting and clean data. It's only when, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but it may be that there are things beyond that where you feel actually we need a scientist, we need an analyst, we need to go into statistical significance, and we need to go into, p-values and things like that, that you may need somebody like that, but you also may not. I work with plenty of companies who, they have analysts, and the analysts, maybe, don't speak to us too much because they're off doing their own stuff, but actually the people in the product team, the people in the marketing team, get everything that they need out of the tools that they're using. So whether that's a BI tool, whether that's a product analytics tool, whatever, so that could be in there. So yeah, I appreciate that's basically a whatever you want kind of answer, but I think that's probably true on that. Cool. So there aren't any further questions. I do want to check from anybody whether whether there's something that somebody didn't ask throughout this. Again, stick them in the QA, stick them directly in chat, and we'll pick those up. One final thing, and as I said, this will kind of come to you as well, is here are some of the links of things that I've talked about. So the guide to product metrics, the guide to product analytics, advanced your analytics strategy, all through there as well. We also have really close partnerships with Product School. Check out Reforge as well. There's some great stuff in there if you haven't already, but a lot of really great information coming through this as well. And finally, as I promised, please take out your phone, scan the QR code, fill out the survey for us. That would be really great. I think throughout all of this, there's a couple of other things I want to kind of point you towards. If you're a Mixpanel customer, top right of your project, there's a question mark. If you click on that question mark, one of the buttons there is visit our community. If you're not a member of the Mixpanel community already, I definitely recommend you doing that. It's something that connects you with not just other Mixpanel customers, but it also connects you with Mixpanel product experts and subject matter experts. So, I'm in there answering questions. We've got like links to webinars, links to, thought leadership things, webinars we've previously done, which you can take a look at as well. You can ask your any questions you want, and there's loads of stuff in there. So I, definitely recommend connecting on that as well. Yeah, if there are no other questions from anybody, then I think we can give everybody 10 minutes back, which is great, which is really appreciated. But yeah, I hope people have found today useful. I think we may be running these potentially as a series. I'll kind of hand that off to Larissa and she can answer that. But if there's anything that you need, as I said, please go to the community, ask questions in there. We'll be in there answering questions. Anything that you feel was missed from today, any questions that you didn't get answers to, especially for those watching the recording, please just send them through and we'll answer them as best we can. But yeah, that's everything. Thanks very much, everybody.